Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here are headlines this hour. Over 20 people still missing following a Russian missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia. Once again, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accuses Russia of war crimes from recent attacks. The man with the solution, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, says he knows how the war between Russia and Ukraine can be resolved. That's all coming up in this bulletin. Now, authorities are still looking for nearly 20 people missing in Vinnytsia after a missile hit an office building on Thursday morning. The death toll has gone up to 23, including 3 children. At least 71 people, including children, have been hospitalized, and 117 have applied for medical help. Now, as we said earlier, the missiles hit an office block and damaged nearby residential buildings, causing a huge blaze which spread to a car park, and it set vehicles alight. The building in question is an office center. The first floor was a diagnostic center which provided people with diagnostics, therapy and surgery. Ukraine says Moscow has intensified missile attacks far from the front line and that it has deliberately hit civilian sites, while Russian forces have been grinding out gains on the battlefield in the east, pummeling urban areas with artillery. In another development, 2 people have been killed after Ukrainian forces shelled a bus station in the separatist-held city of Donetsk in the east of Ukraine. It's coming from a separatist leader who revealed the attack via social media networking site Telegram. Head of the self-proclaimed Russian-backed Donetsk People's Republic, Denis Pushlin, says 2 civilians had been killed, 3 wounded, when the bus station was struck by a howitzer. Ukraine's Interior Ministry's advisor, Anton Hiroshenko, accused Russian forces of social media striking the center of Donetsk, but pinning the blame on Ukraine. Donetsk city has been held by DPR forces since 2014, while Ukraine still controls part of wider Donetsk province, which Russia is trying to capture with the help of its proxies in Ukraine. I will show you this in a minute. A video earlier on from the Ukrainian emergency services reportedly showing heavy damage to a hotel building in Mykolaiv following an airstrike. International media has been able to verify the location of the video, but the buildings and the signs as matched in Streets View and in file imagery. Firefighters on the scene of the battle, there it is, have been battling what remains from flames sifting through mounds of rubble. A Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, says Kazakhstan's efforts to attract sanctions-hit businesses have left Russian markets were absolutely normal. Much earlier, Kazakhstan's president, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, said his country must work to accommodate hundreds of international businesses that have left Russia over sanctions imposed after Moscow sent in its army into Ukraine. Mr. Peskov told reporters, "It's absolutely normal when any country in the world tries to create comfortable conditions for foreign investors. Another thing that is clear is that under unprecedented pressure from the outside, many companies are forced to take such decisions," referring to the hundreds of foreign companies that have left Russia or halted operations since February. He says, unfortunately, this is the reality in which we live and work. Dozens of international companies, including the likes of Renault, McDonald's and BP, have exited the Russian market in recent months, writing off significant losses on their investments as they rush to suspend businesses in the country. Now, apparently, leaders have not been listening to the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who says he knows how the war between Russia and Ukraine can be resolved. But is offering to pitch his suggestions only to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, with whom he's set to have a phone meeting next week. Bolsonaro said he would not unveil his stance, yet he suggested the war in Ukraine could end like that between Argentina and the United Kingdom in 1982 without providing more details. Argentina and Britain fought a short conflict in 1982 over sovereignty of the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic, known in Argentina as the Malvinas. It began in April 1982 when Argentine troops landed on the British-controlled islands, and Britain sent a naval task force to retake them. The poorly equipped Argentine troops stood little chance, and Argentina surrendered 2 months later. Bolsonaro has a phone call scheduled for July 18th with President Zelensky. He says the Ukrainian leader is the one who initially reached out and that he immediately agreed to the call. The Brazilian president visited his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Moscow in February, just a few days before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He has so far taken a neutral stance on the conflict as Brazil looks to keep doing business with Russia. It is the start today of the G20 meetings in Indonesia. The country's finance minister, Sri Mulyani Indrawati, says it's vital for G20 finance ministers to reach a consensus during talks in Bali, warning otherwise it could be challenging for low-income countries facing soaring food and energy prices. The meeting of leaders from the group of 20 major economies are meeting in the resort island as Indonesia tries to find common ground in a group frayed by the Ukraine war and rising economic pressures from soaring inflation. G20 members include Western countries that have imposed sanctions on Russia, also accusing it of war crimes in Ukraine, which of course it denies, as well as nations like China, India, and South Africa, which have been more muted in their response. Sri Mulyani called for G20 members to talk less about politics this time and build bridges between each other to deliver more technical decisions and actions.
When we last met in April, it was in a very challenging circumstances. And today, we are meeting with the challenging circumstances which even more deepen. So the triple threat of war, surging commodity prices, and increased global inflation that can also increase and creating a real spillover to debt, not only for the low-income countries, but also in the middle-income countries or even advanced economy. We are starting before pandemic and then because of pandemic as already using our fiscal space that have the implication of increasing debt position. And now, with this triple threat, this is going to be even more a very dire complex to be managed. So I'm sure you are all aware that the world is watching us closely. There are high expectations for this forum, for this meeting, especially because this is the finance minister and central bank governor, that we are hoping that we can discuss and talk more on a less political but real technical and issue which is matter for all of us. We need to act together to demonstrate why G20 deserves its reputation as the premier forum for international cooperation. So coming together here today is really a big step forward in working through our differences in position and in building bridges toward each other. I hope I can count on you all to find ways that we can maintain the G20's strong track records and working collaboratively to deal with this global crisis. This means that when our meeting ends tomorrow, we will have been able to find a way to reach consensus on what we can do together with the spirit of cooperation and collaboration.
Oh, the pretty long address by Indonesia's finance minister. Ukraine's finance minister is also expected to be at that meeting. He'll be speaking at one of the sessions virtually, of course. Russia's finance minister, Anton Silvanov, will also be addressing the meeting virtually with his deputy traveling to Bali. Well, speaking of Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday addressed an international conference aimed at prosecuting war crimes committed in the country, telling them Russian missiles hit two community facilities in the west of Ukraine, killing at least 20 people and wounding many more. At least 40 European judicial authorities are at the meeting, where they're agreeing to coordinate investigations into atrocities during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the size of their task is highlighted by fresh attacks on civilians far from the war's front lines. 45 countries are represented at the conference holding in The Hague, and they all signed a political declaration on Thursday to work together on investigations. Officials say with more than 20,000 war crimes investigations open and different countries heading teams, evidence needs to be credible and organized.
Сьогодні вранці російські ракети вдарили по нашому місту Вінниця.
Today, in the morning, Russian missiles hit the city of Vinnytsia, an ordinary peaceful city. Cruise missiles hit two community facilities. Houses were destroyed. A medical center was destroyed. Cars and trams were on fire. This is an act of Russian terror. These are not people. These are bastards who have done it. So two cruise missiles hit the city center. 20 people died as of now, including 3 children. And there's a huge number of wounded people. I would like you to observe a minute of silence for all the people who got killed between 2014 and today. All those who were murdered by Russia on Ukrainian soil and in our Ukrainian sky.
На нашій українській землі та українському небі.
Let's bring in public policy analyst Oluwaseyi Adeyemo. He joins me from Lagos, but virtually, of course. Oluwaseyi, great to see you. It's been a while. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Oh, yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's really nice having you on the show all the time. And let's begin, with yesterday's attacks on Vinnytsia. This hasn't happened before. Russia claiming it has not been targeting civilians. What message do you think this attack, on the office building? I mean, it's clear this was an office building, and now over 20 people are dead. What sort of message do you think the Russian government or the Russian forces are trying to send out to not just Ukraine, but to the international community?
Clearly, I mean, from the beginning of the war in February 24th, as far as I'm concerned, Russia has done a lot of things that most of us considered unimaginable. And yes, they've told certain things and claimed that they were not, doing certain things and they were doing certain things. But for me, I mean, speaking directly to your question, they're trying to tell the whole world that they're winning. Yes, they failed woefully because they probably didn't expect that this war was going to last this long. And so they want to, obviously show, Ukrainians and the rest of the world that they're in charge, that they're gaining grounds, they're obviously incurring, into the lands of Ukraine. I mean, they're taking over the lands they proposed that they would take. So yes, I mean, when you're in war, what you want to do is to show your assertion, the fact that you're winning and you're on top of your strategy and you're doing what you are supposed to do. So for me, this is obviously sending a signal to the rest of the world. And if you allow me to say this, maybe it's telling Europeans and Americans that they need to employ more strategy as regards this war. Yes, diplomacy is good, but I think we need to think harder as a people. I'm talking about the rest of the world right now in the way we address and attend to them.
I want us to explore that a little bit. You're talking about strategy, and Russia clearly has one. I mean, they say one thing and then they do another, and they're keeping the cards closer to their chest. But you see the European community, you see NATO, almost every time announcing what it's going to do. There's been military aid, there's been billions of dollars dedicated pledged to Ukraine. There have been weapons, there have been rockets that they have announced for Ukraine. There have also been sanctions on Russia. When you compare the strategies employed by the European Union or these other Western countries to what Russia is doing, you think that they're probably losing focus?
Not losing focus. I mean, one thing we also must also accept that Russia is a big power. They have oil, they have gas, and they have weapons. They're a very strong bloc, and you can't just run over them. And so everybody's being careful. Germany, the rest of them are totally reliant, dependent on the gas. And so Russia.
Oluwaseyi, we seem to be. Oh, wait, you're back. Unfortunately, we really can't hear you. Oluwaseyi, if you can try to reconnect with us so that we can continue this really interesting conversation. I understand you're back. Great. So you were talking about, the strategies employed by both sides, both the Russians as well as, NATO and the EU. And again, we'll try to reconnect with you to have that conversation. In the meantime, stay with the accusations of war crimes. Canada's Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, has told Russian officials at the G20 meeting in Indonesia she holds them personally responsible for war crimes committed during the Russian war in Ukraine. She directly addressed the Russian delegation when she was speaking, telling them it is not only generals who commit war crimes, it is the economic technocrats who allow the war to happen and to continue. Freeland, whose maternal grandparents were born in Ukraine, told the opening of the G20 session that the war is the single biggest threat to the global economy right now. And we have Oluwaseyi back on the line. But I want to quickly move on, from the whole talk about strategy to talk about, the issue of war crimes that the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has been accusing Russia of, and now other countries as well. The judiciary officers of the 45 countries are meeting in The Hague. They're also looking over investigations, beginning investigations into war crimes in Ukraine. And now you have the Canadian finance minister accusing the Russians directly of war crimes in Ukraine. Do you agree with all of these parties that there is war crimes? There are war crimes being committed in Ukraine at the moment?
Oh, obviously. I mean, right from the beginning, it's war crime. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And if you allow me to say this, it's also an addition to the strategy. I mean, there's a need for pressure to be mounted on Russia, on Putin. There's a need for us to come from all angles. Yes, we're doing diplomacy, talking, we're looking at sanctions. We also need to come up with all sorts of strategies. I mean, some of the strategies maybe is not safe to talk about on air, but truth of the matter is this is war against humanity. I, for one, believe that the world should not just see these as something against Ukraine. Everybody should be on that. If you can do it successfully with Ukraine, it probably will try with another country. And so Europe should be careful, particularly because they're closer to him, and the rest of the world. So for me, what is being said right now at the G20 is very, very germane. I believe we've talked politically enough. We need to start looking at all the strategies, economic. We need to come up at him at always. So saying that is a war crime and investigating and making sure that is freezed and charged at the end of this is something the world must consider, because obviously this is war against the world. Because for me, what is happening to these people is not something that should be allowed to go, just the way it's come.
Well, the Russian president, of course, does not care what the rest of the world thinks, at the moment. But, staying with the issue of, what the strategies should be and what leaders should be doing, you do know that Sweden and Finland have formally applied to join NATO, and Russia has threatened, of course. Do you think that this is more of a threat for Russia than the West itself?
I think in both sides, because it's good that they decided to join at this time. And like I said again, whatever must be done at this time must be done, and every tool, everything must be thrown into the cup, because it's obviously something that is not good for the world. And I agree with those who also are careful; they're treading it very carefully. You don't want a situation that this will escalate and become another world war. We can't afford that right now. I mean, we're just coming out from the pandemic. We're not even fully out of the pandemic yet. A lot of things have been destroyed. A lot of things have failed. And we all are just trying to recuperate and get back to our life. So having war, an escalated world war, will not be something we want to deal with at this time. But obviously, I mean, people joining, things being employed, pressures being put is something that I would encourage. I mean, now everything must be thrown into, brought onto the table, and whatever has to be done must be done to ensure that Putin is meant to know that we all are against what he's doing, and it's appalling. What he's doing is war against humanity and should not be allowed to fester.
Yeah, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing for President Putin to hear it. Thanks again, Oluwaseyi. A pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. And sorry about the network.
Well, it is what it is. Thanks again. Well, coming up after the break, Kremlin says there's still work to be done on the EU Kaliningrad transit deal. We'll have more details shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia is accusing, well, has its own accusations of its own, and they're directed at the United States and Britain for helping to train Ukraine's armed forces, calling it part of hybrid warfare being waged by NATO countries against Russia. During a media briefing in Moscow, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said Washington had provided Ukraine with instructors who were helping Kyiv's forces use advanced US-made high-mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS for short. She noted the rockets, which have a longer range and are more precise than other artillery weapons, were being used widely by Ukrainian forces, saying Ukrainian forces are using HIMARS received from the United States everywhere. She said Washington had secretly sent instructors to Ukraine to help its forces learn how to use and aim the new weapons, resulting in civilian targets in Russian-controlled areas being fired upon. Both sides have denied targeting civilians in residential areas in the conflict, which of course has been raging on for at least 5 months. Military analysts believe the new weapons could be a game changer, and Kyiv has already used the rockets to destroy multiple Russian ammunition deposits in eastern Ukraine. Turning her attention to Britain now, she criticized the country's decision to bring hundreds of Ukrainian service personnel to the UK for weapons training. Zakharova said the initiative from London to train up to 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers over the coming months is part of the West's hybrid war against Moscow. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the latest deadly Russian strike that left more than 20 people dead is another reason for the international community to further punish Russia. He confirmed the strike killed 23 people, including 3 children under the age of 10, in the city of Vinnytsia in central Ukraine. The strike, which Ukraine said had been carried out with Caliber cruise missiles launched from a Russian submarine in the Black Sea, it came a day after a breakthrough in talks between Moscow and Kyiv to unblock Ukrainian grain exports and underscored how far the two sides remain from a peace settlement. Zelensky says the democratic world needs to label Russia a terrorist state from what he called a special tribunal, form a special tribunal on Russian aggression, and enable frozen Russian funds to be given to those it wanted to destroy. In the meantime, Ukraine's top war crimes prosecutor and European judicial authorities have met to coordinate investigations into atrocities during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, warning a failure to do so would embolden autocrats. Officials are saying that with more than 20,000 war crimes investigations open and different countries heading teams, evidence needs to be credible and organized. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan told the conference that children, women and men are living in terror, suffering in Ukraine and in so many different parts of the world. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba also reiterated his country's call for establishment for a special tribunal for Russia's actions in Ukraine.
Just like a climate strategy and a COVID strategy, we need an accountability strategy. A strategy driven by the universal belief that all of us are protected by law. Ensuring that all roads lead to justice, now and in the future.
That as we speak, children, women and men, the young and the old, are living in terror. They're suffering in Ukraine and in so many different parts of the world, grieving about what they lost yesterday, holding their breath about what they could lose today and what tomorrow can bring. At a time like this, the law cannot be a spectator. The law cannot recline in comfort in The Hague or anywhere else for that matter, when it's meant to protect and uphold certain principles that are essential for humanity.
Ukraine calls on the establishment of a special tribunal which would have a specific jurisdiction over the crime of aggression against Ukraine. We have heard a number of reservations since the idea first floated in the early March. Most of them express concern that this effort could replace existing international courts and tribunals, thus weakening them. I want to clearly reiterate, we do not have any such intention, and this will not be the outcome of our effort. In fact, we have always been working closely with all international courts and tribunals, and in particular, the ICC.
Coordination, it's an important word because we have to work not only for the next months, the next years, but maybe the next decades. And we will continue to do that to bring all the perpetrators of atrocities in Ukraine to justice.
In the meantime, Russia's defense ministry says its Air Force have downed two Ukrainian fighter jets and destroyed a collection of US-made M777 howitzers in eastern Ukraine. In its daily briefing, the defense ministry also said it had struck a factory in the southern Zaporizhzhia region with caliber cruise missiles, destroying Ukrainian combat vehicles. The Dutch foreign minister is echoing President Zelensky's stance in forming a special tribunal on Russia. We heard him earlier. He was saying Western countries need to consider establishing a special tribunal to try war crimes committed in Ukraine to prevent them from going unpunished. The comment is coming shortly after the US and all those other countries we spoke about earlier agreed in The Hague to coordinate investigations into suspected war crimes in Ukraine. Also taking part in the conference is the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan, who said the deal reached in the Dutch city was a promise to show the stamina moving forward.
We have to fill the vacuum, and the ICC here doesn't have the jurisdiction. So I can imagine that we do look into coming up with such a tribunal. As the Netherlands, we will take an open look into this. It will probably not be easy. There is merit in doing that with as many friends as possible from the international community, but we will seek to support Ukraine where we can. Ladies and gentlemen, our most important win today is that this conference is just the beginning. We are setting up a collaboration initiative allowing us to fight impunity better, together, also in the future. Because our joint voices must not be a one-off exercise. Our combined efforts must and will not stop here today. We need to translate our shared and strong conviction for justice into a unified answer against impunity.
There will be a declaration in due course that 45 states have signed up to, which is a promise to show the stamina moving forward. But if we're to resist the failings of the past, to have this stampede that is sometimes seen of different actors running to crime scenes, we need to be coordinated. We need to have dialogue. We need to have communication. And the dialogue group that is going to be established in due course is an important means.
a press conference after the meeting of judicial officers earlier. Soldiers on the front lines of Ukraine's Donbass region say they're ready to repel the enemy, driving closer to the sound of shelling in tanks and armored vehicles laden with explosives. The soldiers say the prospect of a direct hit is scary, but they're willing to do it for their motherland. Russia's February 24 invasion of Ukraine has caused Europe's biggest conflict since 1945. Millions have fled, thousands have been killed, while cities have been reduced to rubble, and fears of a wider conflict in the West have grown. 88-year-old Valentina Shirenko says everyone apart from one neighbor has left her area and all the houses are empty. The Kremlin, however, says it's engaged in a special military operation. That's how it describes its presence in Ukraine at the moment. And its aim is to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Kiev and its Western allies reject that as a false pretext and accuse Russia of exacerbating a global food crisis and fueling inflation. Well, in the Ukrainian town of Popasana, taken by the Russian troops in May, they may seem to be adjusting at the moment, but they're also abandoned. One of the international crews visited the town of once 20,000 people of fighting sides, both left to continue the standoff in other parts of the Donbass region, leaving destruction in their wake. After the fierce siege by the advancing Russian army, the town looks ghostly at the moment. Nearly all of Popasana's apartment buildings are destroyed or heavily damaged. Streets are battered and deserted. There are no people, no animals, and no birds. So what can happen when war happens? On a rare encounter, a former resident, Vladimir Odorochenko, came to Popasana to take a look at what was left of his house, which he left behind when shelling became unbearable. Thousands of civilians have been killed. Millions more have fled the country since Russia launched its military operation in Ukraine on February 24. I want to bring in security analyst David Otto, who's really itching to get into the conversation. David, great to see you. And I know that, this talk about war crimes that's currently going on in The Hague and all these judges from the 45 countries represented in The Hague are talking about putting together a special tribunal to bring Russia to justice. The question really is, who is going to bring Russia to justice? I mean, we heard the Netherlands, I believe, minister who said, that this has to be a calculated effort. We want to make sure that this is not a one-off experience, for the rest of the world. But how do you bring Russia to justice? How do you bring it to answer for crimes committed in Ukraine?
Amarachi, that's a very good question. As you've highlighted in your introduction, we are on day 142, and still we do not have an end to this war, this crisis that is having a devastating impact, not just on Ukrainian citizens, but throughout the world. As you've seen, we all experience that. You and I are paying for this on a daily basis, with the skyrocketing prices of goods and services, petrol, diesel, gas, the price of wheat and bread, it's all gone up. Now we're talking about a special tribunal, which has been proposed. But mind you, it is still the European Union that is driving this. And of course, the European Union is indirectly and directly a party to this conflict. So it's going to be very challenging, to actually, some kind of guarantee the doctrine of neutrality and fairness, because of course, this will be seen by Russia as, still part of the political sanctions and push, by the West to continuously pound on Russia from the legal side. The ICC will not be seen as a credible, body to, carry out any investigation or indeed bring Russia to book. But again, one has to be very clear. This is not a war that can be blamed on one side. We were expecting, and I mean those who are in fairness for. Who are preaching against, humanity being disseminated. I think we were expecting to see some level of de-escalation. But I can tell you very well that this seems to be more or less provocation. According to the Russian narrative, and this adds upon the added provocation of having Finland and Sweden join NATO, which or assent to NATO as it may, which is seen again by Russia as some further provocation by the West. So I don't think that any of these special tribunals, or indeed the ICC, will have the clout to bring Russia to book, because of course Russia will simply ignore it. It is a superpower, and it has shown its level of resilience. But is this where we should be? I don't think so.
Well, I'm the one asking the questions, David. Thanks for highlighting that, though. But you make a very valid point, about the EU being a judge in its own matter, because it is participating in this war. But the ICC says it's time that the judiciary cannot stand by and just watch. So exactly what can it do in this case?
Yes, again, that's going to be very challenging. I mean, the ICC can say all these words, but clearly, those that are involved in the prosecution will not be seen again as being neutral. I think what we should be clamoring for at this point is to look towards some level of de-escalation. Now, I did mention in the beginning that we are now over 5 months of this conflict, and I can tell you clearly that this conflict keeps expanding. It has moved away. In addition to the military intervention, you still have an increase in the level of misinformation and disinformation which is going on. Therefore, it is very difficult to know who is telling the truth and who is not. And this is all the characteristics of a war. As soon as a war breaks out, there is no morality. I mean, nobody is obliged to, tell the truth. I think you can only prevent, this level of disinformation and misinformation by preventing the war in the first place. So, that is increasing. We also have that economic sanctions still going on. Russia being accused of using, food as some level of, a weapon of war, as the French president Emmanuel Macron called it. That is still increasing. We've seen the level of, I think, Europe is actually, planning or perhaps, forecasting a winter of discontent as a result of this crisis. So the expansion of the war is beyond that. We've seen cyber attacks being carried out, geopolitics, happening, where one country or one side is looking for friends against the other side. So, Amarachi, this is a very challenging time. And as long as the war drags on, and as long as people continue to suffer, it's looking more likely like it's an unending crisis, if I may say. But sadly, I don't think the ICC, has the clout or the neutrality to bring Russia to book. Perhaps, some kind of a further negotiations, would be, the best solution to this crisis.
Well, maybe the further negotiations can be made in Istanbul. I mean, that's where Ukrainian, Russian, and UN officials have been meeting for the past 2 days. I believe it was yesterday that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said considerable progress had been made, although they're talking about, the export of grains from Ukraine through the Black Sea, and how Russia can give, its consent for these grains to leave via that route. But do you think that this could also translate into peace talks, to be like at the cusp of it before we go into deeper discussions on how to end the war?
Yes, Amarachi, I don't think it will translate to peace talks at this point. I think, unfortunately, the United Nations has been reduced to a humanitarian disaster management organization. I think clearly what the UN is looking at now is to kind of reduce the humanitarian crisis. It is not working towards any level of bringing, both sides on the table, because, of course, Russia does not in any way consider the UN to be to be credible. Of course, it does also have, still reserves, its power to, to veto any decision that is made by the UN Security Council because of the veto powers. So that, in itself, what the UN is doing, will not lead to any kind of a negotiation. What I see here is that the UN has chosen a side, and of course that's the side of humanity, to then try and see how we can relieve some of the disaster which is ongoing. But as far as negotiations are concerned, trust me, I don't think the UN is being viewed by either side as a credible party to lead such a negotiation. But that's where we are at this point.
Yeah, and I think the rest of the world has also picked the side of the UN, which is humanitarian. I mean, you see the destruction in Ukraine, and you really can't help but really try to understand exactly why this war is taking place. But there's one man who does say he has a solution to what's going on in Ukraine, and he wants to speak only to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and that's the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. He himself has been facing some political crisis back in Brazil, all thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. What sort of advice do you think he has for the Ukrainian president? I mean, he also wants to maintain relations with Russia as well. He met with the Russian president just a few days before the invasion. So could he be really a neutral party in this?
I think, what, if I were in his head, which of course I'm not, what I'll be thinking about is, who is suffering the most. If you look at the recent attacks, in Venetia, which, of course, the Ukrainians are saying targeted civilian positions. The same thing happened in Kremachok. We saw the same attacks in Bucha, targeting civilian populations. The overwhelming part of this war or crisis, whichever language you prefer to use, is being fought in Ukraine. And therefore, the Ukrainians are suffering the most. Any president that wants to speak to Vladimir Zelensky will, perhaps if they want to see some level of de-escalation, should be telling the Ukrainians that perhaps they should consider some kind of a negotiation with Russia. But I don't know if, Russia is interested to negotiate, beyond or above the Donbass region. Of course, they have declared, those areas in the east as being independent. Now, I don't know if Ukraine is ready to let that go. But overwhelmingly, I think, the people that are suffering are Ukrainians. Ukraine is being disseminated, it's being destroyed. All these rhetorics, that Ukraine is winning, that it should continue to fight, as we heard in the beginning, doesn't seem to be practically, valid. What we see is a continuous pounding of Ukraine. Of course, Russia has the overwhelming force and continuously possesses the capacity to do that. Now, if I were the Brazilian president, what I would be advising the Ukrainian president is to, look for ways to save the nation. Because, of course, at this point, I think, the reconstruction, can happen, but can you bring back the lives that have been lost, the injuries that have been caused? I don't think so. So my advice to the Ukrainian president, if I were the Brazilian president, would be find a solution to this conflict.
We all want him to. Thank you so much, David. Appreciate your thoughts and analysis.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We still have more on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. France celebrated Bastille Day on the 14th. And while it did so, it remembered its neighbor with fireworks display, giving a nod to Ukraine. Stay with us. Welcome back. French President Emmanuel Macron says France must quickly learn how to do without Russian gas, as Moscow is using cuts in supplies to Europe as a weapon in its war with Ukraine. He was speaking in a televised interview to mark France's National Day. The president urged everyone to rein in their energy consumption, adding that he would soon submit an energy restraint plan, which would ask citizens to commit to a general hunt for waste, such as turning off the lights when leaving the office. Energy prices, which were already increasing before Russia launched its war against Ukraine at the end of February, have sharply risen since then, leading to the highest inflation in most major global economies in decades. With about 17% of its supply coming from Russia, France is less dependent on Russian gas than some of its neighbors. But concerns about supply from Russia come as France grapples with already limited electricity generation. That's all due to the unexpected maintenance at its aging nuclear reactors, prompting concern over winter shortages. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund says it expects Ukraine to continue servicing its foreign debt. An IMF spokesperson, Jerry Rice, cleared the air as speculation grows that Kyiv could default on its debt as its battle against Russia's invasion rages on. At the moment, Ukraine is servicing its debt in an orderly way, according to Mr. Rice says. The IMF expects that to continue. He said the fund sees international community grant financing as a priority for the immediate and short term, as that would allow the Ukrainian government to remain operational without incurring further debt. Ukraine's state-owned gas company, Naftogaz, asked its international creditors earlier this week to allow for a 2-year deferral on debt payments, fueling bets that the sovereign could follow. Creditors have been urged to reject the company's request. We have our business correspondent, Amy John Mekwa, here to talk about the economy. But of course, you already know that the US President Joe Biden is in Saudi Arabia. And I know that some talks about oil will be going on, which is his main reason for going there. Yes. You'd wonder why the Saudi Prince wouldn't come to the US, and why it's the US going all the way to Saudi Arabia. That tells you how important that relationship
exactly.
is.
If you want something, you go for it. You don't wait for it to come to you. I guess that's the reason here. But, you know, since 2 days ago when the U.S. inflation came out to a 40-year high, I mean, it's been hitting new highs, 9.1%. We've had a lot of reactions. Yesterday, actually, oil that has been surging above $100 actually went down to below $100, even though it came back up this morning to about $100.35, you know. But we've seen a lot of movement, and of course it's connected to with the inflation, hike in interest rate, and what's going on in Asia, and of course the continuous threat, like I think you just read it just before you came to me, the continuous threat from Russia. Germany have said they're going to stop oil, I think by the 1st of August, and stop gas by the end of the year. So all of this is putting a huge strain on the supply of oil, and of course when there's strain in supply, there's also going to be movement in demand and price. So the US president is and I know you, I mean, you're the foreign desk, you know a whole lot about the relationship between the US and some of these countries, Iran, Saudi Arabia.
There is a lot of expectation, you know, about this meeting, and that's because a group of OPEC plus countries are hoping, you know, that Russia would, you know, quieten down a little bit, and that, you know, hopefully Saudi Arabia will be able to provide the stopgap.
But, you know, there have also been reports that there's no country that can actually plug the hole conveniently of what Russia used to supply to the world. And I guess that's why even the US, I mean the EU, they're still talking about putting an oil price on the cap, so that it's not a total ban, but people can still buy Russian oil, maybe cheaper than others. But of course, you would ask, if you have already alienated Russia, they are not in the SWIFT, they are not part of this, they are not in your meeting, how do you now control how much they sell?
But how will that also affect us, though? Because you've seen the long queues at the filling stations. They're back in Abuja, by the way.
Yes, they're back in Abuja. Back here in Lagos. And I tried to buy petrol yesterday, and they told me it was past 200 naira. And I was like, no, this is too much. I can do 195 and all of us. So this is not 208 naira. So, but I mean, all of this feeds into the Nigerian situation directly, because what we do is import refined products, even though we have the crude. So if we're refining in Nigeria, we would not feel it that much, I think.
Calm down, calm down. I just said off your mic, but really, you'll have more discussions later, I know that. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Well, moving on, the Kremlin maintains there is still work to be done over a European Union ban on the transit of sanctioned goods to the Russian territory of Kaliningrad. Brussels said earlier this week the transit bans only affected road, not rail, transit, and Lithuania should therefore allow Russia to ship sanctioned goods like concrete, wood, alcohol across EU territories to its Kaliningrad exclave. The European Commission has upgraded its guidelines on the transit of goods from Russia to allowing Russia to transport sanctioned goods not only military and war-use goods and technology to its exclave in Kaliningrad through European Union territory by mail. Under the new guidelines, Lithuania's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it will follow the guidelines and allow the sanctioned goods to the transit of the exclave on the Baltic Sea, but will closely monitor them. A move is the first step taken by the EU to solve problems, and the EU should lift its restrictive measures on road transport. Kaliningrad bordered by EU states Lithuania and Poland, relies on railways and natural gas pipelines from Russia's mainland for goods and energy. Well, Super Eagles forward. This will be sports news now. Chidera Ejike has joined German Bundesliga side Hertha Berlin on a seasonal loan deal after leaving Russian club CSKA Moscow. Ejike suspended his contract with CSKA Moscow for the 2022-2023 season after taking advantage of the FIFA ruling relating to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The 24-year-old recorded 10 goals and 8 assists in 55 league games for CSKA Moscow last season. Hertha Berlin manager Freddy Bobic believes Ejike will be a valuable addition to his team. Well, here's our last stop. Bastille Day celebrations in France as fireworks sparkling around the Eiffel Tower with the height of celebrations on Thursday. During one segment, the Parisian monument lit up in the colors of the Ukrainian flag you see there, while the country's Eurovision-winning song Stefania by Kalush Orchestra provided the soundtrack for the lights show. Bastille Day commemorates the storming of the Bastille prison in 1789, one of the key events of the French Revolution. The day has become a national day in France. That's the program today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ibrahim.